step aboard the night train to Edinburgh, where a widow's scream pierces the midnight silence, and a stolen briefcase hides a scandalous secret. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of blackmail, betrayal, and hidden love among a cast of strangers, each with motives as dark as the night. From a mysterious intruder to a shocking photograph, every clue leads to a thrilling confrontation. Will Poirot's little grey cells triumph before the train reaches its final stop? The truth awaits, but time is running out. Chapter 1. The journey begins. The platform at Victoria Station seethed with the restless energy of departure. Porters darted through the crowd, their trolleys laden with trunks and cases, while travellers in furs and tweeds exchanged hurried farewells. Steam curled upward from the great engine of the night train to Edinburgh, its polished brass gleaming under the station's iron canopy. Amid this ordered chaos stood Hercule Poirot, his small, fastidious figure a study in precision. His moustache, waxed to symmetrical perfection, quivered slightly as he inhaled the crisp September air. His Homburg hat sat at a precise angle, and his patent leather shoes reflected the flickering gaslights. A holiday in Scotland awaited, a rare indulgence, but Poirot's keen eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scanned the scene with habitual vigilance. For him, no journey was ever without the possibility of intrigue. He stepped toward the first-class carriage, his cane tapping lightly on the platform. The train was a marvel of elegance. Mahogany panels, velvet curtains and brass fittings that gleamed with quiet pride. Poirot's private compartment, number 3, was a haven of comfort. He settled onto the plush seat, arranging his overcoat with care and placing his small valise on the rack above. A glass of anisette, procured from the attentive steward, rested on the folding table before him. He sipped it sparingly, savouring the licorice warmth, and allowed his mind to drift, not to the Scottish moors, but to the passengers he had glimpsed on the platform. One figure lingered in his memory, a woman in widow's black, her face obscured by a heavy veil. She had moved with a peculiar grace, her steps measured yet tense, as if propelled by some inner urgency. Her gloved hands gripped a small leather case, its surface worn but expensive. She had passed his compartment door moments after he boarded, her silhouette briefly framed against the corridor's dim light. Poirot noted the rigidity of her posture, the slight tremor in her grip. Was it grief, he wondered, or something more complex? His little grey cells, ever restless, began to stir. The whistle sounded shrill and commanding, and the train lurched forward with a groan of steel. The platform receded, swallowed by the London dusk, and the rhythmic clatter of wheels filled the air. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled, and considered the widow. Her attire suggested mourning, yet there was something theatrical in her bearing, as if the black crepe were a costume rather than a necessity. He made a mental note to observe her further, should their paths cross again. The corridor outside his compartment hummed with the soft murmur of voices and the shuffle of feet as passengers settled in. A portly gentleman in a tweed suit brushed past, muttering about the inconvenience of night travel. A young woman's laughter, bright and fleeting, echoed from a neighbouring compartment. Poirot's ears, attuned to every nuance, caught the faint clink of a glass, the rustle of a newspaper. All was as it should be, yet he felt a prickle of unease, a premonition that this journey would not be as tranquil as he had hoped. He rose, smoothing his waistcoat, and stepped into the corridor to stretch his legs. The gaslights cast a warm glow, illuminating the polished wood and the numbered doors of the first-class compartments. At the far end, he saw the widow again standing by the window, her veil still in place. She was alone, her gaze fixed on the darkening landscape beyond the glass. Poirot approached, his manner courteous but deliberate. "Pardon, madam," he said, his voice soft yet clear. "But is all well? The journey, it is comfortable for you?" She turned, startled, and for a moment he glimpsed her eyes through the veil. Dark, wide and wary. "Quite comfortable, thank you," she replied, her voice low, with a trace of an accent he could not place. "I prefer to keep to myself." "Naturellement," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "I am Hercule Poirot. If there is any service I may render, you have only to ask." Her lips parted, as if to speak, but she merely nodded and turned back to the window. Poirot retreated, his curiosity piqued. The widow's reticence was not uncommon, yet there was a tension in her silence that spoke of secrets. Back in his compartment, he sipped his anisette and reflected. The night train to Edinburgh was a microcosm of society. Strangers bound together by chance, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories. Poirot knew that among them, as always, lay the potential for a puzzle. He closed his eyes, the gentle sway of the train lulling him, but his mind remained alert, waiting for the first thread of mystery to unravel. Chapter 2. The Midnight Disturbance. The night train to Edinburgh thundered through the darkened countryside, its wheels a steady metronome against the silence of the late hour. Hercule Poirot, seated in his first-class compartment, had just extinguished the small reading lamp above his seat. The glass of anisette, now empty, rested on the folding table, its faint licorice scent lingering in the air. He had intended to retire, but sleep eluded him. His mind, ever active, replayed the image of the veiled widow, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, as he had since learned from the conductor's passenger list. Her guarded demeanour and the tight grip on her leather case suggested a woman burdened by more than grief. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with curiosity, sensing the stirrings of a mystery. At precisely 11:47 p.m., the tranquillity of the first-class carriage shattered. A scream, sharp and piercing, cut through the rhythmic clatter of the train. It was not a cry of mere surprise, but one of raw, visceral fear, tinged with something Poirot could not yet name. Desperation, perhaps? He rose swiftly, his small frame moving with surprising agility. Slipping on his silk dressing gown and adjusting his nightcap, he stepped into the corridor, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the scene. Other passengers emerged, their faces pale in the flickering glow of the gaslights. A portly gentleman, whom Poirot recognized as Lord Reginald Ashby, clutched a velvet robe about his ample frame, his expression one of indignation. A young woman, Miss Clara Henshaw, the governess, hovered near her compartment door, her sharp features drawn tight with curiosity. Dr. Felix Mortimer, a lean man with nervous hands, appeared next, his medical bag clutched as if it were a talisman. Mr. Thomas Blake, the boisterous businessman, leaned out of his compartment, his nightshirt askew, demanding to know what the devil was happening. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, an elderly widow with a deceptively frail appearance, stood at the far end of the corridor, her keen eyes observing all with quiet intensity. The conductor, Mr. Harris, a wiry man with a harried expression, hurried toward compartment 7, from whence the scream had originated. Poirot followed, his steps measured but purposeful, his cane tucked under his arm. The door to compartment 7 stood ajar, and within sat the widow, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Her veil was lifted, revealing a face of striking beauty, pale, with high cheekbones and dark, expressive eyes framed by curls that had escaped their pins. Her hands trembled as she clutched the leather case to her chest, and her breath came in short, uneven gasps. "Madame," Poirot said, his voice calm yet commanding attention. "What has occurred? You are distressed." Mrs. Vance's eyes darted to him, then to the conductor, who hovered anxiously. "A man," she said, her voice low but clear, with that faint, unplaceable accent. "He entered my compartment. He rifled through my belongings there, by the table. When I screamed, he fled." Poirot's gaze swept the compartment. The small folding table held a single glass of water, undisturbed. The bed was neatly made, though a corner of the blanket was slightly askew. A handbag rested on the seat. its clasp undone, but its contents apparently intact. The leather case, still in Mrs. Vance's grip, bore no signs of tampering. He stepped closer, his eyes catching a faint scuff mark on the carpet near the door, a mark that suggested a hurried exit. "And what, madame, was taken?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Nothing," she replied quickly, too quickly. I checked. Everything is here." Poirot's moustache twitched. The absence of theft was curious. A thief bold enough to enter a lady's compartment at midnight would not leave empty-handed without reason. He turned to Mr. Harris, who was mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Monsieur, you saw no one in the corridor?" "No, sir," Harris said, his voice tight. "I was in the next carriage, checking the tickets. I came as soon as I heard the scream." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details. He addressed Mrs. Vance again. "This man, what did he look like? His attire, his manner?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the case. "It was dark. He wore a coat, I think, dark with a hat pulled low. I couldn't see his face." Her eyes flickered, avoiding Poirot's gaze, and he noted the subtle shift in her posture, a slight hunching, as if shielding herself from scrutiny. "Very well," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "You must rest, madame. Monsieur Harris, please ensure the lady is not disturbed further." As the conductor escorted Mrs. Vance to a glass of brandy in the dining car to steady her nerves, Poirot remained in the compartment. He examined the scuff mark more closely. It was fresh, the carpet's pile disturbed in a way that suggested a heavy boot. He crouched, his knees protesting slightly, and sniffed the air. A faint trace of tobacco, cheap, acrid, lingered, not the refined blend he associated with first-class travellers. He straightened, his mind racing. The intruder had been real, but Mrs. Vance's account felt incomplete, as if she were withholding a vital piece of the puzzle. Returning to the corridor, Poirot observed the other passengers, who had not yet dispersed. Lord Ashby was muttering about the incompetence of railway staff, his hand resting protectively on a locked briefcase at his side. Miss Henshaw's eyes darted between the compartments, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Dr. Mortimer, still clutching his medical bag, offered to check on Mrs. Vance, but his offer seemed more anxious than altruistic. Mr. Blake, now fully dressed, laughed too loudly, suggesting the incident was a mere prank. Mrs. Gray, silent, watched them all with an air of detached amusement, her silver hair catching the light. Poirot approached her. "Madame Gray, you are observant, no? Did you see or hear anything before the scream?" Her eyes, sharp despite her age, met his. "I heard footsteps," she said softly. "Heavy ones, not like the usual tread of passengers. They stopped outside her door, then moved quickly away after the scream. I couldn't see who it was. The corridor was too dark." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. The heavy footsteps corroborated the scuff mark, but the absence of a clear description raised questions. Was the intruder a passenger, or someone who had slipped into the carriage unnoticed? And why had Mrs. Vance's scream been so delayed? If the intruder had entered and begun searching, she would have woken sooner, unless she had been awake already, watching him. Back in his compartment, Poirot sat, his hands folded, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The widow's distress was genuine, yet her story lacked coherence. The leather case she guarded so fiercely, what did it contain? Papers, perhaps, or something more valuable? And why had the intruder fled without taking anything? Poirot's instincts told him that Mrs. Vance was not merely a victim, but a player in a game whose rules were still hidden. He leaned back, the train's rhythm a counterpoint to his thoughts. The night train to Edinburgh was no longer a mere conveyance. It was a stage, and the drama had begun. Poirot's little grey cells, alert and relentless, awaited the next act. Chapter 3. The Cast of Characters. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of the night train to Edinburgh. casting a muted glow over the first-class carriage. The train had come to an unexpected halt at a small, windswept station in the Northumbrian countryside, the conductor announcing a mechanical fault that would delay their journey for several hours. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, saw opportunity in this pause. A stationary train was a contained world, its passengers unable to flee his scrutiny. His little grey cells hummed with anticipation as he prepared to unravel the threads of the mystery that had begun with Mrs. Eleanor Vance's midnight scream. Poirot stood in the corridor, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the passengers as they emerged for breakfast in the dining car. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and toast, mingling with the faint tang of coal smoke from the engine. The passengers, though outwardly composed, betrayed subtle signs of unease. A glance too sharp, a gesture too abrupt. Poirot's eyes, keen as ever, missed nothing. He had already formed impressions of those sharing the carriage, and now, with the train stalled, he could study them more closely, like pieces on a chessboard awaiting their next move. First, there was Lord Reginald Ashby, a man whose aristocratic bearing was marred by a perpetual scowl. His florid face and heavy jowls suggested a life of indulgence, yet his eyes held a wary intelligence. He carried a locked briefcase, its leather polished but scratched, as if it had seen much travel. At breakfast, he sat alone, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table, the briefcase never leaving his side. When a steward offered to store it, Ashby's refusal was curt, almost panicked. Poirot noted this possessiveness, wondering what secrets the briefcase might hold. Next was Miss Clara Henshaw, the governess, whose angular features and pinched mouth gave her the air of a woman perpetually displeased. Her dress was modest, her brown hair pulled into a severe bun, but her eyes darted about with restless curiosity. She lingered near the dining car's entrance, her posture suggesting she was listening more than eating. When Poirot passed her, she offered a tight smile, but her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin, betraying nerves. Was she merely inquisitive, or did her watchfulness conceal a deeper purpose? Dr. Felix Mortimer intrigued Poirot most of all. The physician, lean and pale, had a nervous energy that seemed at odds with his profession. His hands, long and delicate, trembled slightly as he stirred his tea, and his eyes flicked toward Mrs. Vance's empty seat at the far end of the dining car. He had been quick to offer aid after the midnight incident, yet his solicitude felt rehearsed, as if motivated by something other than professional duty. Poirot recalled the faint tobacco scent in Mrs. Vance's compartment. Did the doctor smoke? Perhaps a cheap blend. Mr. Thomas Blake, the businessman, was a study in contrasts. His loud voice and hearty laugh filled the dining car, but his joviality seemed forced, like an actor playing a role. His broad shoulders and ruddy complexion spoke of vitality, yet his eyes, when unguarded, held a flicker of unease. He engaged Lord Ashby in conversation, boasting of trade deals in Glasgow, but Ashby's responses were monosyllabic. Blake's gaze occasionally strayed to Miss Henshaw, and Poirot wondered if there was a connection between them, hidden beneath his bluster. Finally, there was Mrs. Lavinia Gray, the elderly widow whose frail appearance belied a formidable intellect. Her silver hair was neatly coiled, her black mourning dress immaculate. She sat near the window, her hands folded calmly, but her eyes missed nothing. When Poirot greeted her, she responded with a nod and a faint smile, as if she recognized a kindred spirit in observation. Her quiet presence was a counterpoint to the other's agitation, and Poirot sensed she held knowledge she had not yet shared. Mrs. Vance herself appeared late to breakfast, her veil lowered once more, though a glimpse of her pale face revealed dark circles beneath her eyes. She sat alone, her leather case resting on the seat beside her, and declined all but a cup of tea. When Dr. Mortimer approached, Offering a murmured condolence, she stiffened, her response cool and distant. Lord Ashby, seated nearby, avoided her gaze entirely, his fingers tightening on his briefcase. Poirot, sipping his coffee, noted these interactions with care. A web of tensions bound these passengers, and Mrs. Vance seemed its centre. He approached the conductor, Mr. Harris, who was overseeing the stewards with a harried air. "Monsieur Harris," Poirot said, his voice low, "you have the passenger manifest, oui? Might I inquire about the occupants of this carriage?" Harris, eager to please the renowned detective, produced a neatly written list. Poirot scanned it, confirming the names and noting their compartment numbers. Ashby in 4, Henshaw in 5, Mortimer in 6, Vance in 7, Blake in 8, and Gray in 9. His own compartment, 3, placed him conveniently central. He returned the list with a nod, his mind already mapping the geography of the carriage. The intruder, if real, had entered from the direction of the lower-numbered compartments, his own, or perhaps Ashby's, or the empty ones beyond. Poirot strolled the corridor, pausing outside compartment 7. The door was locked, but he recalled the scuff mark and the tobacco scent. He glanced at the neighbouring compartments, noting their proximity. Could the intruder have been a passenger, slipping back to their own quarters? Or had someone entered from another carriage, perhaps during a brief stop? The train's delay offered time to investigate, but it also heightened the passengers' unease, making them less guarded and more revealing. In the dining car, Poirot took a seat near Mrs. Gray, whose quiet observation matched his own. "Madam," he said, and his tone conversational, "you have travelled much, I think. Do you find these night trains conducive to rest, or do they stir the imagination?" Her lips curved in a knowing smile. "They stir more than the imagination, Monsieur Poirot. People are never quite themselves in such confined spaces. Secrets have a way of slipping out." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Indeed, madam. And have you observed any such secrets on this journey?" She paused, her gaze drifting to the other passengers. "I see a man who guards his possessions too closely," she said, glancing at Ashby. "A woman who listens more than she speaks," she added, nodding toward Henshaw. "And a doctor whose concerns seem personal." Her eyes lingered on Mortimer, then returned to Poirot. "But you, monsieur, see more than I." Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her perceptiveness. Mrs. Gray was no mere bystander. She was a witness, perhaps even a player. As he rose to return to his compartment, he felt the weight of the mystery deepening. The scream, the intruder, the guarded widow, each was a piece of a puzzle, and Poirot's little grey cells were already arranging them into a pattern. The train might be stalled, but the drama was in motion, and Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover its truth. Chapter 4. The Disappearance. The Northumbrian countryside stretched bleakly beyond the windows of the night train to Edinburgh, its fields shrouded in a morning mist that clung to the stalled train like a veil. The mechanical fault, still unresolved, had cast a pall over the first-class carriage, where passengers fidgeted with impatience or retreated into uneasy silence. Hercule Poirot, however, found the delay a gift, an opportunity to observe, to probe, to unravel the threads of the mystery that had begun with Mrs. Eleanor Vance's midnight scream. His little grey cells, ever alert, sensed that the next act of the drama was imminent. Poirot was in the dining car, savouring a second cup of coffee, when a commotion erupted. Lord Reginald Ashby, his florid face now apoplectic, stormed in, his voice booming with aristocratic outrage. "My briefcase!" bellowed, drawing every eye. "It's gone! Stolen from my compartment! I demand the conductor search this train at once." The dining car fell silent. Miss Clara Henshaw paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, her sharp eyes narrowing. Dr. Felix Mortimer, seated near the window, fumbled his teacup, a faint clatter betraying his nerves. Mr. Thomas Blake, ever the opportunist, leaned forward with a grin as if relishing the drama. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her silver hair catching the light, merely raised an eyebrow, her expression one of quiet curiosity. Mrs. Vance, alone at a corner table, kept her gaze fixed on her untouched tea, her veiled face unreadable. Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and approached Lord Ashby. "Monsieur, calm yourself, I beg you," he said, his voice soothing yet authoritative. "Hercule Poirot is here to assist. Tell me, when did you last see this briefcase?" Ashby, his jowls quivering, gestured wildly. "I left it in my compartment, number 4, locked, as always, when I came to breakfast. I returned not 10 minutes ago, and it was gone. The door was secure, no sign of tampering. Someone on this train is a thief." Poirot's moustache twitched. A locked compartment, an absent briefcase, and no signs of forced entry. This was a puzzle worthy of his talents. "Permit me, monsieur, to examine the scene," he said, gesturing for Ashby to lead the way. The conductor, Mr. Harris, joined them, his wiry frame tense with the weight of responsibility. Compartment 4 was as tidy as Poirot expected from a man of Ashby's station. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn back, and a faint scent of lavender hung in the air. Curious, for Ashby did not strike him as a man who favoured such fragrances. Poirot knelt, inspecting the carpet and the narrow space beneath the seat. No scuff marks, no traces of disturbance. He tested the window. It was locked tight, its latch undisturbed. The door's lock, too, showed no scratches or signs of picking. Whoever had taken the briefcase had either a key or an uncanny skill. "Monsieur," Poirot said, turning to Ashby, "this briefcase, what did it contain? You must be precise." Ashby hesitated, his eyes darting to the corridor where curious passengers lingered. "Documents," he said curtly. "Business matters, highly sensitive. I'll say no more." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Sensitive enough perhaps to invite theft. Come, monsieur, you must trust Hercule Poirot if we are to recover your property." But Ashby's lips tightened, and he shook his head. Poirot noted the man's pallor, the sweat beading on his brow despite the cool morning. Fear, not just anger, drove his outburst. The briefcase held more than mere documents. Poirot was certain. Leaving Ashby to stew, Poirot sought out Mrs. Vance, who had returned to her compartment. She sat with her leather case on her lap, her veil lifted to reveal a face pale but composed. "Madame," Poirot began, his tone gentle, "you have heard of Lord Ashby's misfortune. Did you perhaps see anyone near his compartment this morning?" Her eyes met his, steady but guarded. "I saw no one," she said. "I kept to my compartment after last night." Her fingers brushed the leather case, and Poirot caught a faint scent of lavender, identical to that in Ashby's compartment. "I use a lavender handkerchief," she added, as if sensing his scrutiny. "It's common enough, surely." "Indeed," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "But coincidences, they are rare in the affairs of Hercule Poirot." His next stop was Miss Henshaw, whom he found in the corridor, her posture stiff as she pretended to adjust her shawl. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you are observant, no? Did you notice anything unusual near Lord Ashby's compartment?" Her lips pursed, and she shook her head. "I was in the dining car, like everyone else." But Poirot's sharp eyes caught a small tear in the hem of her dress, its edges frayed as if caught on something sharp. A lock, perhaps. She noticed his gaze and quickly tucked the hem behind her. "A clumsy moment with my trunk," she said, her voice too brisk. Poirot moved on, his mind cataloguing these details. In the dining car, he approached Dr. Mortimer, who was scribbling in a notebook, his hands unsteady. "Doctor," Poirot said, "you were quick to aid Mrs. Vance last night. Did you perhaps pass Lord Ashby's compartment this morning?" Mortimer's pen paused, and he looked up, his eyes flickering with unease. I was in my compartment preparing my notes. I saw nothing." His voice was tight, and Poirot noted a faint stain on his cuff. Ink, or perhaps something else? Mr. Blake, when questioned, laughed off the theft. "Ashby's probably misplaced it himself," he said, his voice booming. "Fellow's always clutching that case like it's his lifeline." But his laughter rang hollow, and Poirot sensed a deflection. Mrs. Gray, as ever, watched from her corner of the dining car. When Poirot approached, she tilted her head. "A busy morning, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low. "A scream in the night, a theft by day. This train is a stage for mischief." "Indeed, madame," Poirot replied. "And what does your keen eye tell you of this theft?" She smiled faintly. "Only that Lord Ashby is more frightened than angry. Whatever was in that briefcase, it's worth more to him than he admits." Poirot nodded, her words aligning with his own suspicions. The lavender scent, the torn hem, the doctor's nerves, the businessman's bluster, all were pieces of a puzzle, and the missing briefcase was its heart. Was it connected to Mrs. Vance's intruder, or was it a separate thread? Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, arranging the facts into a pattern. As the train's whistle sounded, signalling the repair's completion, Poirot returned to his compartment. The journey would soon resume, but the mystery was far from resolved. The briefcase's disappearance was no random act. It was a calculated move in a game whose players were only now revealing themselves. Poirot adjusted his tie, his eyes gleaming with determination. The truth, he knew, was within his grasp, waiting for his method and order to bring it to light. Chapter 5. The Hidden Truth. The night train to Edinburgh rumbled back to life, its wheels grinding against the tracks as it emerged from the mist-shrouded Northumbrian station. The passengers, though relieved by the resumption of their journey, carried a palpable tension that hung heavier than the morning fog. Hercule Poirot, seated in the dining car, observed this unease with the precision of a watchmaker. The theft of Lord Reginald Ashby's briefcase, coupled with Mrs. Eleanor Vance's midnight intruder, had transformed the carriage into a crucible of suspicion. Poirot's little grey cells, ever vigilant, sifted through the clues. The lavender scent, the torn hem, the nervous doctor, seeking the pattern that would reveal the truth. The dining car, with its crisp linens and gleaming silver, was the perfect stage for Poirot's next move. He had orchestrated a luncheon seating arrangement through the amenable Mr. Harris, ensuring that Mrs. Vance, Dr. Mortimer, Miss Henshaw, Mr. Blake and Mrs. Gray were at his table, with Lord Ashby nearby, still clutching the empty space where his briefcase had been. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of conversation provided a veneer of civility, but Poirot sensed the undercurrents of fear and secrecy swirling beneath. He began with Mrs. Vance, whose veil was once again lifted, revealing a face pale but composed. "Madam," he said, his tone warm yet incisive, "you have endured a most distressing night, yet you remain poised, a testament to your strength. Tell me, this leather case you guard so closely, what is its importance?" Mrs. Vance's fingers tightened on the case, now resting beside her plate. "It contains personal effects," she said, her voice steady but her eyes avoiding his. "Mementos of my late husband, nothing of interest to others." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And yet, madame, an intruder sought to disturb your possessions. Perhaps these mementos are more valuable than you suggest." Her lips parted, then closed. "My husband, Mr. Vance, was a financier," she said at last, her words measured. "He died in a boating accident 3 months ago. His estate is complicated. There are legal matters, disputes over his will, but that is all." Poirot noted the hesitation, the careful choice of words. "Complicated, you say? Disputes often breed enemies, no?" She offered a faint smile, tinged with sadness. "Perhaps, but I am merely a widow, seeking peace." Poirot turned to Dr. Mortimer, who was slicing his roast chicken with undue concentration. "Doctor," he said, "you knew Mr. Vance, I understand, a professional Acquaintance, perhaps. Mortimer's knife slipped, grazing his plate with a faint screech. He recovered quickly, but his cheeks flushed. "A minor consultation," he said, his voice strained. "Years ago. I scarcely recall the details." "Curious," Poirot mused, his eyes narrowing. "For a physician to forget a patient is most unusual, no? Was Mr. Vance perhaps involved in matters that required discretion?" Mortimer's hand trembled as he reached for his wine. "It was nothing of consequence," he insisted, but his gaze flickered toward Mrs. Vance, a glance so fleeting Poirot nearly missed it. The doctor's unease was a beacon, signalling secrets yet to be uncovered. Miss Henshaw, seated across from Poirot, ate sparingly, her sharp eyes darting between her fellow passengers. Poirot addressed her next. "Mademoiselle, you have the air of one who observes much. Did you perhaps notice anything unusual in the dining car this morning, before Lord Ashby's loss was discovered?" Her fork paused, and she met his gaze with a defiance that belied her prim exterior. "I was preoccupied with my meal," she said. "I saw nothing out of the ordinary." But her fingers brushed the torn hem of her dress, a gesture Poirot noted with interest. Mr. Blake, ever boisterous, laughed too loudly. "All this fuss over a briefcase," he said, waving a hand. "Likely Ashby's mislaid it in a panic. He's been clutching it like a lifeline since we boarded." Poirot's smile was polite but probing. "And you, monsieur, have you no possessions you guard with equal care?" Blake's grin faltered, but he recovered with a shrug. "My business is in my head, not in some case. I travel light." Mrs. Gray, silent until now, spoke softly. "People guard what they fear to lose, Monsieur Poirot. Lord Ashby's briefcase, Mrs. Vance's case, each holds something precious or dangerous." Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her insight. "You speak wisely, madame. And what do you guard?" Her eyes twinkled. "Only my memories," she said, but her tone suggested more. As the meal progressed, Poirot steered the conversation subtly, planting seeds of unease. He complimented Miss Henshaw on her attention to detail, hinting at her torn dress without mentioning it directly. She stiffened, her napkin twisting in her hands. He asked Blake about his business dealings, noting the man's quick deflection to trivial anecdotes. With Mortimer, he lingered on the topic of medical ethics, watching the doctor's fingers tremble. Mrs. Vance, though composed, betrayed her tension in the way she clutched her case, as if it were a shield. After luncheon, Poirot lingered in the corridor, his mind assembling the pieces. Mrs. Vance's story of her husband's death was plausible, yet her guardedness suggested hidden stakes. Mortimer's connection to Vance, however minor, was a thread worth pulling. Miss Henshaw's torn dress and Blake's forced joviality hinted at their own roles, perhaps peripheral, perhaps central, and Mrs. Gray, her calm observation was a mirror to Poirot's own. But was she merely a spectator? A chance encounter in the corridor deepened the mystery. As Poirot passed compartment 5, he overheard a whispered exchange between Miss Henshaw and Mr. Blake. "The papers!" she hissed, her voice low but urgent. "They weren't there." Blake's response was muffled, but his tone was sharp. "Keep your voice down. We'll find another way." Poirot stepped back, his presence unnoticed, and filed this away. Papers? Were they the contents of Ashby's briefcase, or something else entirely? The lavender scent in Ashby's compartment, the torn hem, the tobacco trace in Mrs. Vance's, all were fragments of a larger picture. The intruder and the theft were connected, Poirot was certain, but the motive remained elusive. He returned to his compartment, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The train's motion, steady now, was a counterpoint to the chaos within. Each passenger was a player in this drama, their secrets interwoven like the tracks beneath them. Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, arranging the clues into a pattern. The truth was close, he felt it, but it required one more revelation to bring it into focus. As the countryside blurred past, Poirot resolved to watch, to listen, and to wait for the moment when the hidden truth would step into the light. Chapter 6. The Nighttime Revelation. The night train to Edinburgh pressed northward through the gathering dusk, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the undercurrents of unease that pulsed through the first-class carriage. Hercule Poirot, his mind alight with the threads of the mystery, Mrs. Eleanor Vance's intruder, Lord Ashby's missing briefcase, the whispered talk of papers, felt the puzzle nearing a critical turn. The passengers, bound by the confines of the train, could no longer conceal their secrets so easily. Poirot's little grey cells, sharpened by years of unravelling human motives, anticipated a revelation, and he was determined to be present when it came. After dinner, the dining car emptied as passengers retired to their compartments, their faces etched with the strain of the day's events. Poirot, however, remained wakeful, his senses attuned to the smallest disturbances. He sat in his compartment, number 3, with the door slightly ajar, allowing the faint glow of the corridor's gaslights to filter in. The train's motion was soothing, but Poirot's mind was far from rest. The lavender scent in Ashby's compartment, Miss Henshaw's torn dress, Dr. Mortimer's nervous evasion, and Mrs. Vance's guarded case, all pointed to a conspiracy, but its shape remained elusive. At precisely 2:03 a.m., a soft creak broke the silence, distinct from the train's usual groans. It came from the corridor, near the higher-numbered compartments. Poirot rose, his silk dressing-gown tied neatly, and slipped into the shadows, his movements silent as a cat's. The corridor was dim, the gaslights turned low, but his eyes adjusted quickly. He glimpsed a figure moving toward the luggage car at the carriage's end, a slight, stooped silhouette, unmistakably Mrs. Lavinia Gray. Her black mourning dress blended with the darkness, but the glint of her silver hair betrayed her. Poirot followed, his steps muffled by the carpet, keeping a careful distance. The luggage car, a cavern of trunks and cases stacked under flickering lamps, was accessible only through a narrow door, which Mrs. Gray eased open with practiced care. She moved to a corner where a small, unremarkable suitcase rested, its lock glinting faintly. Kneeling, she produced a key and opened it, withdrawing a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Her hands, steady despite her age, began to untie the string, but Poirot chose this moment to act. "Madame Gray," he said, stepping forward, his voice soft but resonant in the quiet car. "It is late for such errands, no?" She froze, her fingers still on the parcel, then turned to face him. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, held no trace of fear, only a weary resignation. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "you are as relentless as I expected. I suppose you wish to know what this is." Poirot inclined his head. "I wish to understand, madame. The night is full of secrets, and you, I think, hold one of them." She sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly, and sat on a nearby trunk, the parcel in her lap. "Very well," she said. "I took Lord Ashby's briefcase. I believed it contained evidence to clear my son's name." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a mother's fierce resolve. "My son, Edward, died 2 years ago, disgraced in a financial scandal tied to Mr. Vance's firm. I learned recently that documents proving his innocence existed, documents Vance had suppressed. When I saw Ashby's obsession with his briefcase, I thought it might hold them." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And did it?" She shook her head. "Nothing but business papers, contracts, ledgers, nothing about my son. I returned it to his compartment before he noticed, but I fear I was careless. The lavender scent you detected, it was from my sachet, which must have lingered." Poirot nodded, the piece fitting neatly into the puzzle. "And this parcel?" he asked, gesturing to the brown paper bundle. "Letters," she said simply, "from Edward, written before his death. They mention a colleague who knew of Vance's dealings. I hoped to find that colleague's name in Ashby's briefcase, but I was mistaken." Poirot studied her, his gaze softening. Her motive was clear, her actions driven by love, not malice. Yet her confession clarified only part of the mystery. The briefcase's contents, whatever they were, had provoked Ashby's fear, not Mrs. Gray's quest. "You have been candid, madame," he said. "Return to your compartment and trust Hercule Poirot to resolve this matter." She nodded, clutching the parcel, and slipped back to the carriage. Poirot lingered, his mind racing. Mrs. Gray's theft was a side thread, but it confirmed the briefcase's importance. He decided to confront Ashby, suspecting the man's secrecy held the key. He knocked softly on compartment 4. Ashby, bleary-eyed in his dressing gown, opened the door, his expression shifting from irritation to alarm at the sight of Poirot. "What is it now?" he demanded. "Your briefcase, monsieur," Poirot said, stepping inside. "It has been returned, I understand." Ashby's eyes widened, and he gestured to the seat where the briefcase sat, its lock intact. "Found it this evening," he muttered. "Must have been misplaced." "Misplaced?" Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "Or returned, perhaps by one who borrowed it briefly." He watched Ashby's face pale, then pressed on. "Open it, monsieur. Let us see what you guard so fiercely." Ashby hesitated, his hands trembling, then unlocked the briefcase with a key from his pocket. Inside was a single item, not documents as he had claimed, but a photograph. Poirot took it, his heart quickening. It showed Mrs. Vance and Dr. Mortimer in a tender embrace, their faces unmistakable. The image was grainy, likely taken in secret, but its implications were explosive. "Monsieur," Poirot said, his voice low, "this is no business document. Why do you carry such a thing?" Ashby's shoulders slumped. "It's insurance," he said, his voice hoarse. "Mortimer gave it to me. Said it would ensure Vance's widow cooperated in a financial matter. I didn't ask details. I didn't want to know." Poirot's little grey cells whirred. The photograph was a tool of blackmail, linking Mrs. Vance, Dr. Mortimer and Ashby in a scheme tied to her late husband's estate. The intruder, the theft, the whispers of papers, all converged on this image. But who had orchestrated it, and why? He returned the photograph to Ashby, advising him to keep it safe, and left the compartment. The train's rhythm was a steady pulse, but Poirot's mind was a storm. Mrs. Gray's confession had peeled back one layer, but the photograph revealed a deeper intrigue. As he retired to his compartment, he knew the final act was near. The players, Vance, Mortimer, Ashby, perhaps Henshaw and Blake, were bound by a secret that threatened to unravel them all. Poirot's task was to bring it to light, with order and method, before the train reached its destination. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. The night train to Edinburgh hurtled through the pre-dawn darkness, its wheels singing a relentless song against the tracks. Hercule Poirot, seated in his compartment, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him like the heavy air before a storm. The photograph in Lord Ashby's briefcase, a clandestine image of Mrs. Eleanor Vance and Dr. Felix Mortimer in an embrace, had ignited his little grey cells. It was the keystone of the puzzle, linking the midnight intruder, the stolen briefcase, and the whispered talk of papers. With the train nearing its final hours before Edinburgh, Poirot knew the time for revelation had come. He must gather the players, expose their secrets, and bring order to the chaos that had unfolded in this confined world. At dawn, as the first streaks of light pierced the horizon, Poirot requested Mr. Harris, the conductor, to assemble the key passengers in the dining car. The air was crisp, the tables set with fresh linens, but the atmosphere was taut with anticipation. Poirot stood at the head of the car, his small frame commanding attention, his moustache impeccably waxed despite the hour. Around him sat Mrs. Vance, her face pale beneath her lifted veil. Lord Ashby, clutching his briefcase with white-knuckled hands. Dr. Mortimer, his nervous fingers tapping the table. Miss Clara Henshaw, her sharp eyes wary. Mr. Thomas Blake, his joviality subdued. and Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her silver hair gleaming as she watched with quiet intensity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we are on a journey not only to Edinburgh, but through a web of deceit. A scream in the night, a stolen briefcase, a photograph of compromising nature. These are not accidents, but threads of a single tapestry. Hercule Poirot will now unravel it." He turned to Mrs. Vance, whose dark eyes met his with a mixture of defiance and dread. "Madame, your scream alerted us to an intruder who, curiously, took nothing. You claimed it was a man in a dark coat, yet your account lacked detail. Why? Because you knew who he was." Mrs. Vance's lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot pressed on. "The intruder was Dr. Felix Mortimer." A gasp rippled through the car, and Mortimer's face drained of colour. "He entered your compartment not to steal, but to search for a photograph. The one now in Lord Ashby's briefcase, showing you and the doctor in an intimate moment." Mortimer lurched forward, his voice hoarse. "That's preposterous! I was in my compartment." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "The scent of cheap tobacco in Madame Vance's compartment matches the brand you smoke, Doctor. The scuff mark on her carpet aligns with your heavy boots. You sought the photograph because it threatens Madame Vance's inheritance. Her late husband's will, I suspect, includes a clause that would disinherit her if infidelity were proven." Mrs. Vance's composure cracked, her hands trembling on her leather case. "It's true," she whispered. "Felix and I, we were together before my husband's death. But I loved him. Edward knew nothing of it." Poirot nodded, turning to Lord Ashby. "And you, monsieur, carried this photograph in your briefcase, not for business, but as a tool of blackmail. Dr. Mortimer gave it to you, did he not, to ensure Madame Vance's cooperation in a financial scheme tied to her husband's estate?" Ashby's jowls quivered, but he said nothing, his silence a confession. Poirot continued, his gaze shifting to Miss Henshaw. "Mademoiselle, you played a role as well. Your torn dress, caught on the lock of Ashby's briefcase, betrays your attempt to plant the photograph. You are no mere governess, but an accomplice, perhaps hired by Dr. Mortimer to secure his leverage." Miss Henshaw's face twisted with fury. "I only did what I was told," she spat. "Mortimer promised me a share if we could control the Vance fortune." Mr. Blake, who had been uncharacteristically silent, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot fixed him with a piercing stare. "And you, monsieur, were a distraction. Your loud demeanour, your constant chatter, it was meant to divert attention from the scheming of Mortimer and Henshaw. But you are no mastermind, merely a pawn who hoped to profit." Blake's grin was gone, his shoulders slumping. "I needed the money," he muttered. "Business hasn't been good." Poirot turned to Mrs. Gray, who sat with serene dignity. "Madame, your theft of the briefcase was a separate act, driven by a mother's love. You sought evidence to clear your son's name, but you found nothing. Your honesty last night has spared you from this web of deceit." Mrs. Gray inclined her head, her eyes glistening with gratitude. Poirot faced the group once more. The scheme was simple yet cunning. Dr. Mortimer, knowing of Mrs. Vance's affair, obtained the photograph to blackmail her. He enlisted Miss Henshaw to plant it in Lord Ashby's briefcase, ensuring Ashby's complicity in pressuring Madame Vance to release funds from her husband's estate. The intruder was no thief, but Mortimer, seeking to recover the photograph when he feared it might be discovered. The scream, Madame Vance, was not only fear, but realization that your lover had betrayed you. Mortimer stood, his face ashen. "I confess," he said, his voice breaking. "I loved Eleanor, but the money, it was too tempting. I meant no harm, only to secure our future." Mrs. Vance's eyes filled with tears. "I trusted you," she said, her voice barely audible, "but I never meant for this." Poirot's expression softened, but his resolve was firm. The heart, it leads us astray, but the law is clear. Blackmail is a crime, as is conspiracy. Monsieur Harris, you will summon the authorities at the next station." As the passengers absorbed the weight of his words, Poirot stepped back, his work nearly done. The dining car was silent, save for the distant clatter of the train. The truth had been laid bare, its players exposed by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. Yet one task remained: to ensure justice was served before the journey's end. Chapter 8. The Resolution. The night train to Edinburgh steamed toward its destination, the dawn light now a golden glow across the Scottish lowlands. The dining car confrontation had left the passengers subdued, their secrets laid bare by Hercule Poirot's unerring logic. The air in the first-class carriage was heavy with the aftermath of revelation. Yet Poirot, standing by the window of his compartment, felt the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. His little grey cells had triumphed, weaving the threads of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's intruder, Lord Ashby's stolen briefcase, and the incriminating photograph into a coherent tapestry. But the final act, justice, remained to be played out. As the train approached Waverley Station, Poirot coordinated with Mr. Harris, the conductor, to ensure the authorities would be waiting. Dr. Felix Mortimer, Miss Clara Henshaw, and Lord Ashby were to be detained for their roles in the blackmail scheme, while Mr. Thomas Blake, though a minor player, would face questioning. Mrs. Vance, though a victim of betrayal, was not entirely blameless, her affair a catalyst for the conspiracy. Poirot, however, reserved judgment on her heart, focusing instead on the crimes at hand. In the dining car, as passengers gathered their belongings, Poirot observed their final moments together. Mrs. Vance sat alone, her leather case now less a shield than a burden. Her face, unveiled, bore the weight of her lover's treachery, yet her posture suggested resilience. She caught Poirot's eye and offered a nod, a silent acknowledgement of his role in uncovering the truth. Poirot returned the gesture, his expression one of quiet understanding. The law would decide her fate, but her dignity remained intact. Lord Ashby, his aristocratic bluster diminished, clutched his briefcase as if it could restore his tarnished honour. He avoided Poirot's gaze, his silence a testament to his shame. Miss Henshaw, her sharp features drawn, whispered furiously to Blake, who shrugged her off with a scowl. Their alliance, born of greed, had crumbled under scrutiny. Dr. Mortimer, pale and defeated, sat with his head in his hands, his medical bag forgotten at his feet. The photograph, now in Poirot's possession for safekeeping, was a silent witness to his downfall. Mrs. Lavinia Gray approached Poirot as he prepared to disembark. Her silver hair gleamed in the morning light, and her eyes held a warmth that softened her stern demeanour. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "you have given me hope. My son's letters are safe, and perhaps with your insight, I may yet clear his name." Poirot bowed, his hat in hand. "Madam, the truth is a powerful ally. If there is justice for your son, it will be found. You have my word." She pressed his hand briefly, her parcel of letters tucked under her arm, and stepped onto the platform, a figure of quiet resolve. Poirot watched her go, his heart stirred by her loyalty to a lost cause. As the train slowed to a stop, uniformed officers boarded, guided by Mr. Harris. Poirot handed over the photograph, explaining its significance in concise, precise terms. Dr. Mortimer rose without protest, his shoulders slumped, while Miss Henshaw's protests were sharp but brief. Lord Ashby, after a moment's hesitation, followed, his briefcase no longer a symbol of power, but of his complicity. Blake, grumbling, was escorted for further inquiry. The officers, efficient and discreet, ensured the process was swift, sparing the other passengers undue spectacle. Mrs. Vance remained, her status uncertain. Poirot approached her as she stood on the platform, the Edinburgh skyline rising behind her. "Madame," he said, "you have lost much, but you are free to rebuild. The heart, it heals if given time." Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, met his. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I shall try." As she walked away, her leather case in hand, Poirot turned to the bustling station. The air was crisp, the city alive with promise. His holiday awaited, but the thrill of the chase lingered. He adjusted his Homburg hat, his moustache curling with a faint smile. "Order and method," he murmured. "They never fail, Hercule Poirot." With a final glance at the train, now emptying of its secrets, he stepped into the Edinburgh morning, ready for whatever puzzle life might next present.